The galaxy had survived worse than war. It had endured expansion, collapse, and the slow, grinding decay of empires that once believed themselves eternal. What it had not survived was uncertainty. Transit Station Epsilon 7 was a minor hub on the edge of civilized space. Station Commander Vrax had overseen 40,000 vessel transits without incident. The station's automated systems were simple: scan, verify, route. Ships arrived. Ships departed. The process required no thought. Until the Merchant Dawn didn't arrive. Its trajectory had been perfect. Its last transmission routine. Sensors showed it entering the transit corridor on schedule. Then, nothing. Not an explosion. Not a distress call. Just an empty corridor where a ship should have been. Run diagnostics, Vrax ordered, his four eyes narrowing at the display. The systems returned green across every metric. Where's the ship? Unknown, the AI replied. No record of passage. No debris. No energy signature. That's impossible. Confirmed. Vrax stared at the empty space on his display. In his 40 years of service, ships didn't just vanish. They broke down. They collided. They exploded. They didn't disappear. 3 hours later, the colonial transport Meridian vanished in the same corridor. Then the military frigate Dominance. By the end of the first day, 17 ships had entered that corridor. None had emerged. Within 72 hours, the pattern spread. Navigation beacons in Sector 19 began transmitting coordinates that didn't match their positions, off by fractions of a degree, but enough to send ships veering into gravitational wells. An automated defense grid protecting the Kethral homeworld activated without authorization, burning through 6 months of power reserves in 3 hours before shutting down permanently. A deep space relay repeated a message it had sent 20 years prior, perfectly preserved, as if time itself had stuttered. And everywhere, the same impossible phenomenon. Ships vanishing mid-transit, leaving no trace except confused traffic controllers and panicked families waiting for arrivals that would never come. Across thousands of inhabited systems, the same reports arrived within the same narrow span of time. The crisis had no clear front, no borders, no enemy that could be named. Trade routes that had been stable for millennia became traps. Ancient star maps, maps that predated most living species, began to disagree with reality. At first, the dominant civilizations treated it as noise, then as coincidence, then as sabotage. Only later did they allow themselves to think the word that frightened them: design. The great councils convened with confidence carefully maintained. Their analysts spoke in absolute terms. Every known power was accounted for. Every rival species had been modeled, simulated, wargamed to extinction and back again. The galaxy, they declared, was fully understood. Humanity did not appear in a single briefing. Humans were a historical footnote. A loud, short-lived species from a minor spiral arm. Fragmented, emotion-driven, self-consuming. They had flared brightly and then vanished. Some records claimed extinction by internal conflict. Others suggested ecological collapse. A few maintained that humans had simply failed to matter long enough to be remembered. Whatever the truth, the conclusion was the same. Humans were irrelevant. That certainty became the foundation of every strategic assumption. And every assumption began to fail. The worst incident came 19 days into the crisis. Fleet Admiral Korath commanded 6,000 ships, the largest peacetime armada ever assembled. Their mission was simple: transit through Alpha 9, the most secure corridor in known space, and demonstrate galactic unity after the recent disappearances. All vessels, status check. Korath ordered from the bridge of the flagship Eternal Ascendant. 6,000 acknowledgements lit her display. Perfect formation. Perfect readiness. Commence transit. The armada entered the corridor. At first, everything was normal. Telemetry flowed smoothly. Ships maintained formation. Korath watched the progress markers advance. Then her communications officer spoke, voice tight. "Admiral, we're receiving acknowledgements from ships that haven't responded yet." "What?" "The timestamps are wrong. We're getting responses from vessels 3 light minutes ahead, but they're timestamped from 30 seconds ago." Korath pulled up the data herself. "Impossible. Communications couldn't travel faster than light. All ships, emergency halt." The display went dark. Not dead. Empty. 6,000 icons vanished simultaneously. "Restore the feed," Korath shouted. Her bridge crew worked frantically. Systems rebooted. Displays flickered back online. The tactical map showed empty space. The Armada was gone. Every ship, every crew, thousands of lives. Not scattered, not destroyed, simply not there anymore. Karath stared at the impossible emptiness. Her hands were shaking. "Send word to Central Command," she said quietly. Tell them we just lost the war. We just don't know who we're fighting yet." Panic did not spread immediately. Pride held it back. The elder species had survived too long to admit fear so easily. They searched for explanations that preserved their superiority. Experimental weapons, unknown natural phenomena, a statistical anomaly. But the disappearances continued. Not random, not clustered, patterned. Entire sectors became silent, their stars still burning, their planets still turning, but every artificial signal gone. Civilizations woke to find themselves alone, cut off from neighbors they had spoken to the day before. Military confidence hardened into aggression. Fleets were mobilized. Borders were reinforced. New weapons were deployed, each more devastating than the last. Power was projected loudly, desperately, as if volume could replace certainty. It did not work. The attacks came without violence. Systems failed. Forces were diverted. Strategic reserves were drained, chasing phantoms that never revealed themselves. There was no enemy to strike, only consequences. Observers began to notice something else. The failures were selective. Certain systems were bypassed entirely. Others were neutralized with surgical precision. No excessive destruction. No waste. It was as if something was shaping the war, not fighting it. Ancient intelligences, beings who measured time in geological epochs, felt a discomfort they had not known since their earliest expansions. This was not chaos. This was restraint. That realization was more frightening than any massacre. Deep Archive historians were quietly tasked with impossible work, re-examining the past for anything that might explain the present. Forgotten treaties, lost civilizations, suppressed records. They searched the margins of history. They did not search for humans. Humans were beneath notice. Their technology had never rivaled the great builders. Their lifespans were brief. Their societies unstable. Their wars were messy, inefficient, emotional. So the galaxy believed. Dr. Senavoth was an archival researcher, not an active scientist. Her job was cataloging old data before it decayed beyond recovery. Routine work. Boring work. The decommissioned observatory orbiting a dead star had been forgotten for 3 centuries. Its automation continued simply because no one had bothered to turn it off. Its final scan appeared in Senna's queue as a corrupted file. She almost deleted it. Something made her look closer. The scan showed a signal. Faint. Old. Buried beneath cosmic noise so dense it should have been invisible. But it wasn't noise. It was a pattern. Senna ran it through every analysis algorithm she had clearance for. Nothing matched. The signal didn't correlate with any known technology, any recorded civilization, any theoretical framework. She pulled up the observatory's operational history. Last survey target. Coordinates deep in what was now called the Empty Quarter. Historical note. Badly corrupted. Region previously surveyed by species designation. Corrupted. Status. Extinct. Senna tried to recover the corrupted data. The name that emerged made her laugh. Human. Everyone knew humans were irrelevant. A minor species that had flared and died before achieving anything noteworthy. She flagged the file for deletion and moved to close it. Then she noticed the timestamp. The signal wasn't old. It had been modulated within the last decade. Senna's hands froze over her console. "That's impossible," she whispered. The signal pulsed again, as if in response. The signal structure didn't match communication. It matched construction. Gravitational harmonics used to stabilize planetary orbits, to anchor megastructures, to shape space itself for engineering purposes. This wasn't a message. It was a foundation, something built to last. And it was still active. The system attempted to categorize it. Military? The structure was too defensive. Industrial? No resource extraction signatures. Scientific? No observation equipment. The final classification pulled from archives so old they predated the current empire. Strategic patience asset. A designation used only once in recorded history by the early survey fleets when they encountered constructs that served no immediate purpose. Structures built to wait, to endure, to activate when conditions were met. Senna stared at the classification with growing dread. The humans hadn't died out. They'd been waiting. Her console flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. What? Her files began deleting themselves. Not randomly. Systematically. Every reference to the signal. Every analysis. Every backup. She tried to lock the system. Too late. The observatory's core shut down remotely, something that shouldn't be possible across light years. Senna watched her research vanish. Then she remembered. She'd sent a preliminary finding to her supervisor 18 hours ago, before she'd understood what she was looking at. That message was already propagating through the network. Incomplete. Corrupted. But enough. Enough to start people asking questions. Enough to make the galaxy realize they'd been watched. The emergency councils met within hours of Koratha's disaster. By then, the pattern was undeniable. 17 ships lost initially. Then Koratha's armada. Trade routes disrupted across 4 sectors. And still no enemy. Admiral Renth Cole had commanded fleets through 3 major conflicts. He'd never seen the strategic command look frightened before. "We are not dealing with ghosts," Renth stated firmly, his voice cutting through the murmur of worried delegates. "Human technology, yes. But automated. Residual. Without guiding intelligence." "Then explain the station blackout," someone countered. "Ancient failsafe. Triggered by proximity. And the missing crews. Unfortunate interaction between incompatible technologies. And the signal? The access codes." Renth hesitated. "Archaeological curiosities. Nothing more." The room fell silent. Finally, the Supreme Coordinator spoke. "Recommendations? Avoid former human territories," Renth said carefully. "Reclassify as hazardous zones. Continue expansion in other sectors." "You're suggesting we retreat from empty space?" "I'm suggesting we exercise caution." "Denied." The coordinator's tone was final. "The Empire does not retreat from extinct species. Increase patrols. Map the anomalies. Humans are gone. What remains is ruins. And ruins can be cleared." The vote passed overwhelmingly. Renth didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the ancient memo recovered from the archives. The one written by a general who'd fought scattered human colonies centuries ago. They do not rush. They endure. And they remember. The crisis worsened. Supply convoys vanished along routes that had been mathematically optimized for safety. Defensive networks activated and deactivated without command, as if responding to invisible hands. Entire star systems were isolated, not destroyed, but carefully disconnected, cut away like diseased tissue. The pattern was wrong. Natural disasters did not behave this way. Enemy empires did not show such restraint. Even the most ruthless conquerors left signatures: wreckage, radiation, chaos. This left nothing. Behind closed data channels, unease began to spread. A minor research collective noticed that the systems being bypassed by the crisis shared subtle characteristics. Infrastructure age. The systems left untouched tended to rely on older designs. Slower networks. Redundant physical systems rather than purely digital ones. Worlds that had modernized aggressively were the ones most affected. Another group found that automated defenses were failing in a very specific way. They were not being overwhelmed. They were being convinced to stand down. Authentication codes were not broken by brute force, but by logic, by sequences that anticipated how the systems would respond and adjusted accordingly. It was not hacking. It was understanding. Senna's fragmentary report was pulled from quarantine and studied again, this time without the assumption that it was meaningless. The signal structure did not match modern design principles. It was inefficient by current standards. Overbuilt. Layered with redundancies no rational engineer would include unless they expected failure as a constant condition. The design philosophy was old, unfashionable, human. That realization was dismissed at first. Humans had never demonstrated such foresight. Their historical record was filled with rushed solutions and short-term thinking. Yet the crisis unfolding now felt like the opposite of that pattern. It felt prepared. Elsewhere, long-range sensors detected mass distortions in deep space, movements that suggested objects of immense scale changing position. The readings were faint, partially masked, and initially attributed to stellar drift or dark matter interactions. But the movements were directional, purposeful. The objects were not traveling along known lanes. They were cutting through regions considered empty and used, strategically irrelevant. regions no one monitored closely, regions once explored by early human expansion before humanity vanished from the records. For the first time, a senior intelligence overseer authorized a review of pre-extinction human doctrine. Not their politics, not their wars, their philosophy. What emerged was fragmented, inconsistent, and deeply unsettling. Humans believed survival was temporary. They assumed catastrophe was inevitable. They planned not for peace, but for collapse. Their myths spoke of watchers, of guardians who would stand when others fell, of sacrifices made so that something else could endure. These were cultural artifacts, the analysts insisted. Stories born of fear, primitive coping mechanisms. And yet, the galaxy was collapsing in exactly the way humans had feared. The unease became impossible to contain when a fortified system, one protected by the combined fleets of three major powers, was neutralized without a single shot fired. Its defenses shut down in perfect sequence. Its communication array went dark. Its fleets were forced into emergency stasis by cascading system locks. No deaths, no destruction, just removal. The system was left intact, helpless, and isolated. That was when the dominant civilizations felt something new. Not confusion, not anger, fear. Because whatever was doing this was not trying to win a war. It was demonstrating control. Chief Engineer Mara Telkin had lived on Carvel her entire life. 47 years watching ships built, launched, and sent to defend the galaxy's borders. Now she was watching the system die. The evacuation had been ordered 3 days ago. Too little time. Too many people. The transports could save maybe 30% of the population. She'd volunteered to stay. Someone needed to keep the manufacturing cores running until the last transport left. Her console showed the approaching destabilization. Energy readings spiking. Gravitational anomalies spreading. The crisis, whatever it was, had finally reached them. Mara watched the countdown. 14 minutes until catastrophic failure. She thought about her children, already off-world. At least they'd be safe. Then the readings changed. The energy spike stopped. Not collapsed. Stopped. Gravitational tides flattened. The cascade halted mid-process. What the hell? Mara whispered. Her displays showed impossible data. Something was holding the system together. Something immense. Something that shouldn't exist. She pulled up the long-range sensors, cranking them to maximum resolution. There, at the edge of the system, a structure, planet-sized, impossibly complex, bending space around it like a lens. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Now it was everywhere. And Carvel was stable. Sensors watching Carvel registered the expected signs first. Energy instabilities rippled through the outer system. Gravitational tides surged in patterns that matched the crisis elsewhere. Long-range observers began recording the same signatures that preceded every previous neutralization. The system's defenders braced for silence. Instead, the data inverted. The gravitational surge flattened. Energy fluctuations stabilized. The cascading failures stopped mid-process, as if halted by an unseen hand. Then something unprecedented occurred. The hostile influence, whatever force had been unraveling systems across the galaxy, was pushed back. Not destroyed, not disrupted, redirected. Sensors detected a massive displacement wave moving outward from Carvel, bending spacetime itself into a smooth, controlled arc. The phenomenon did not explode. It did not radiate. It behaved like a dam closing against a flood. The crisis recoiled. The system survived. Across the galaxy, analysts stared at their displays in stunned silence. Carvel should have been erased. Instead, it was untouched. The confusion lasted only moments before fear rushed in to fill the gap. Because the force that intervened did not identify itself. There was no communication, no claim of responsibility, no detectable fleet, only a faint, lingering distortion at the edge of the system, an echo of something immense passing through and moving on. In a neighboring sector, a planetary governor noticed something impossible. The star his world orbited, a stable yellow sun for 4 billion years, was losing luminosity. Not slowly, not naturally. 10% brightness drop in 6 hours. His science team ran every test they knew. The star wasn't dying. Its fusion was stable. But something was siphoning energy at a scale that made planetary power consumption look like a candle. "Where's it going?" the governor asked. His chief scientist pulled up gravitational readings. "There," She pointed at a distortion at the system's edge. Something's there. Something so massive it's bending our instruments. And it's feeding on our star. Yes, the star did not die. It was being used. Moments later, a hostile fleet advancing through that sector vanished. This time, there was debris, not wreckage. Sliced matter. Cleanly separated hulls drifting in parallel trajectories, their internal systems intact but frozen. No explosion, no thermal bloom, just ships cut apart with surgical precision, as if space itself had been folded through them. The implications spread faster than the data. This was not random defense. This was targeted intervention. Someone, or something, was choosing when to save and when to erase. Panic erupted at lower levels first. Civilian populations flooded communication networks with questions no authority could answer. Military commanders issued contradictory orders, unsure whether to advance or withdraw. The dominant civilizations convened emergency sessions with unprecedented urgency. Confidence was gone. It had been replaced by a brittle determination to reassert control before fear became irreversible. They labeled the intervening force an unknown third party. They classified the events as hostile action. They authorized escalation. Deep space weapons, long forbidden due to their destabilizing effects, were activated. Autonomous kill nets were deployed along critical corridors. Experimental technologies were rushed from prototype to battlefield without full testing. The galaxy chose force over understanding. As escalation orders propagated through military networks, entire command chains failed. Not violently, not completely, selectively. Orders vanished mid-transmission. Authorization hierarchies looped back on themselves. Automated systems flagged commands as invalid, not due to corruption, but because of conflicts that did not exist seconds before. Someone was rewriting context faster than the galaxy could react. The most alarming discovery came from the temporal analysts. They found evidence that the interventions at Carvel and the dimmed star had been anticipated. Not predicted. Anticipated. The defensive correction at Carvel had activated before the crisis reached its peak. The energy siphon had begun moments before the hostile fleet entered the system. The timing was too perfect. The unknown force was not responding to events. It was operating ahead of them. That realization shattered the last remaining illusion of parity. The dominant civilizations had always believed that the highest form of power was reaction speed, the ability to see, decide, and strike faster than any opponent. Now they faced something that had already decided. A fragment of data, long ignored, resurfaced in the aftermath. Pulled from the same forgotten channels as the earlier signal, it was older still, buried beneath layers of deprecated protocols. It was not a message. It was a contingency marker. Intervention threshold reached. The origin tag was unmistakable. Human. That should have been impossible. Humanity had never possessed the scale, the coordination, or the patience required for such a system. Their history showed no evidence of this level of foresight. And yet, the evidence was no longer subtle. Something built by humans, or built in their name, had just altered the course of a galactic war. Not by conquest. By control. Fear spread upward now, infecting even the eldest minds. Emergency escalation protocols reached their final stage. Total mobilization was declared. Borders were sealed. Civilization-scale weapons were primed. The galaxy prepared to strike blindly into the dark. In the scramble to understand the interventions, ancient vaults were opened, archives sealed not by secrecy, but by disinterest. Human history existed there in fragments, scattered across forgotten servers and decaying data crystals, mislabeled and untranslated. Senavoth led the research team. What they found changed everything. Human conflicts did not end with extinction. They ended abruptly, across multiple regions, within a narrow span of years. Wars halted mid-campaign. Industrial growth flattened simultaneously in distant systems. Communication traffic dropped everywhere at once, not gradually, not unevenly. That was not collapse. That was coordination. Human records were not erased by enemies. They were not overwritten by catastrophe. They were deliberately dismantled. Data structures disassembled cleanly. Cultural archives reduced to fragments that preserved emotion but destroyed context. Poetry survived. Philosophy survived. Technical blueprints did not. It was as if humanity had chosen what parts of itself deserved to be remembered and what parts needed to vanish completely. No species does this, Senna's assistant said, staring at the data. No one willingly erases their own legacy. Humans did, Senna replied quietly, because they believed survival required sacrifice. The deeper they searched, the darker the truth became. Predictive models recovered from early human research were crude by modern standards, but their conclusions were disturbingly familiar. They showed a galaxy that would inevitably converge toward the same end state. Hyperconcentration of power, escalating technological arms races, and existential-level conflict that no alliance could contain. Humans had not predicted who would cause it, only that it would happen, and that when it did, reaction would be too late. The solution humanity chose was not victory. It was preparation. Entire human worlds had gone dark, not destroyed, but dismantled. Planets stripped of infrastructure and abandoned deliberately. Populations relocated into deep space habitats designed to disappear from conventional scans. Some were never meant to survive long-term. They were testbeds. Human colonies volunteered to be erased from history. Their purpose was not endurance, but learning. How to hide, how to endure isolation, how to persist without resupply or recognition. Millions died in those experiments. Not in war. In silence. Records show generation ships sent into interstellar voids with no destination. Only instructions to observe, record, and never return. Families agreed to never be known, never be rescued, never be remembered. Among the recovered data was a personal log. Its origin world was listed as New Tasman. The log was unsigned, fragmented, but enough remained to reconstruct its meaning. We voted today. The measure passed 67 to 31. My daughter asked me why we have to leave. I told her it's to keep her safe. I didn't tell her the truth, that we're leaving so her children's children might have somewhere to return to. The Empire is coming. Not this year. Maybe not this century. But they're coming. And we have a choice. Fight and burn. Or leave and survive. We've chosen to survive. It will cost us everything we've built. Every home. Every grave. Every memory tied to soil. But memory can be carried. And we've had practice at losing. The relocation ships launch in 40 days. I won't live to see where they go. I'm staying with the dismantlement crew. Someone has to make sure the planet is clean when we leave. Someone has to erase the welcome mat. I volunteered. My daughter will hate me for it someday, but she'll be alive to hate me. That's enough. The log ended there. The timestamp indicated the author remained on New Tasman for another 11 years. No further entries were recovered. Senna read the log 3 times before she could continue. She had catalogued extinctions before. This was different. This was choice. Conscious. Calculated. Carried through across generations. Human governments collapsed not because they failed, but because they dissolved themselves. Central authority was intentionally fragmented. Leadership structures were replaced with layered redundancies and autonomous cells that could operate independently for centuries. Humanity made itself small. On purpose. The greatest shock came from recovered construction logs. Humans had begun building their largest projects before they ever encountered major alien powers. Not ships. Not stations. Foundations. Massive frameworks hidden in gravitational shadows. Structures embedded within asteroid belts, inside rogue planets, beneath stellar coronas. They were not weapons at first. They were shelters. Then they were anchors. Then they became something else entirely. Human engineers documented failure constantly. Catastrophic loss. Structural collapse. Energy overloads that wiped out entire research teams. Each failure was logged, studied, and repeated until the system worked. They paid for every lesson with lives. The archives showed no celebration, no triumph, only endurance. As alien analysts pieced together the timeline, another realization took hold. Humanity had reached a point where remaining visible was more dangerous than disappearing. They had assessed the galaxy and judged it not malicious, but immature, too reactive, too driven by dominance, too willing to escalate without understanding consequences. So humanity stepped away. They withdrew fleets. They shut down trade. They abandoned diplomatic channels. They erased themselves from the narrative of power, not because they were weak, because they were afraid of what the galaxy would become, and afraid of what they might have to do if they stayed. The final revelation spread slowly, like a pressure crack forming in crystal. Human extinction records had been falsified, not by aliens, by humans. Their last visible transmissions were carefully constructed failures. Their final wars staged to look self-destructive. Their collapse presented as inevitable. The galaxy had accepted the lie eagerly, because it confirmed every prejudice it already held. Now, with the crisis unfolding exactly as humanity had feared, that lie felt heavier than any weapon. Humanity had not vanished by accident. They had chosen to leave the stage. They had chosen obscurity over dominance. They had chosen to prepare in the dark while the galaxy argued in the light. The emotional weight of that choice settled across the dominant civilizations like gravity. This was not an enemy that had risen suddenly. This was a species that had endured centuries of sacrifice without recognition, without assurance their plan would ever be needed. They had accepted the possibility that everything they built would remain unused, that their suffering would mean nothing. Until now, as this understanding spread, fear transformed into something deeper. Guilt. Because the galaxy realized that when humans disappeared, no one had tried to stop them. No one had asked why. And now, as systems fell and stars dimmed, and unseen forces reshaped reality itself, the truth became impossible to deny. Humanity did not disappear because it could not survive. Humanity disappeared because it chose to carry the cost alone. The systems intervening in the crisis were not being directed by a living authority. They were executing judgments encoded long ago, judgments designed to activate only when the galaxy crossed specific thresholds of risk. Humanity had not prepared for enemies. They had prepared for collapse. Alien strategists finally understood why human technology had seemed so contradictory. Humans did not optimize for efficiency. They optimized for survivability under worst-case conditions. Every system assumed sabotage, misinformation, and systemic failure as constants. Where other civilizations built weapons to overpower rivals, humans built systems to outlast catastrophe. The interventions witnessed so far, the stabilization of Carvel, the dimming of the star, the surgical erasure of advancing fleets, were not acts of conquest. They were containment measures. Defensive responses scaled for threats that exceeded conventional warfare. Human doctrine rejected escalation as a primary tool. Escalation was unpredictable. It bred retaliation. It increased entropy. Instead, humans favored denial. Deny territory. Deny momentum. Deny catastrophic outcomes before they could propagate. This doctrine explained the most unsettling aspect of the crisis, its restraint. The most profound revelation came from a recovered human framework directive. Not a command. Not a threat. A condition. If interstellar conflict reaches irreversible propagation velocity, initiate Guardian Protocol. Guardian. The term resonated across every translated archive. Humanity had never seen itself as rulers of the galaxy. They had not sought dominion or tribute. They had defined their role differently. Caretakers. Not of species. Of continuity. Humanity believed the galaxy itself was fragile, not physically, but socially. Too many powers. Too many rivalries. Too much technological reach without corresponding restraint. Someone, they concluded, would eventually ignite a chain reaction that no fleet could stop. So humans built systems to intervene when restraint failed. They did not trust future humans to make that decision. They trusted machines guided by hard moral constraints encoded during humanity's darkest years. The balance of power shifted not because humans revealed greater weapons, but because the galaxy realized it was no longer the arbiter of its own survival. Some resisted. A coalition of elder powers declared the human systems illegitimate. They argued that no extinct species had the right to dictate the future of the living. They mobilized forces designed specifically to target large-scale constructs, weapons capable of destabilizing stars permanently. It was a gamble, and humanity's systems responded. Senavoth was manning a deep space telescope when it happened. Every sensor in her station screamed. Mass displacement on a scale her instruments couldn't fully register. Something was moving. Something that had been hiding behind gravitational lensing and spatial distortion. Now it was revealing itself. "Give me a visual," Senna ordered, voice shaking. The display resolved slowly. When it did, her entire team went silent. A structure the size of a planet. Not a sphere, something more complex. Interlocking segments forming impossible geometries. Mass so dense it bent starlight around it like a lens. It moved with deliberate slowness, positioning itself between two advancing fleets and a densely populated stellar cluster. A warning without words. Fire your weapons, and you kill billions. Senna checked the structure's composition readings. Familiar. Too familiar. Human engineering signatures. Redundancy patterns. Failure-tolerant design. How long has that been there? Someone whispered. Senna ran the gravitational history. The distortions went back centuries. This thing had been here, invisible, the entire time. Since before we knew to look, she said quietly. The Guardian, because that's what it was, did not move again. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Sensors across half the galaxy detected it simultaneously. A planet-sized structure moving with impossible precision, bending space-time around it like a controlled wound. It did not advance toward any civilization. It positioned itself between the coalition fleets and a densely populated stellar region. Calculations ran instantly. The coalition's weapons could damage the construct, but only by triggering stellar collapse that would wipe out billions of uninvolved lives. Humanity's system had placed itself where retaliation would be indistinguishable from genocide. Human morality, the galaxy realized, was ruthless in a way no conqueror had ever been. It forced others to confront the consequences of their own actions. The coalition fractured within hours. Some withdrew immediately. Others hesitated, paralyzed by the realization that victory would cost everything they claimed to protect. That hesitation sealed the outcome. Guardian Protocol advanced to its next phase. Across the galaxy, key transit corridors were locked. High-risk technologies were suppressed at the infrastructure level. Entire classes of weapons ceased functioning, rendered inert by logic traps embedded deep within shared physical constants humanity had quietly influenced over centuries. The galaxy screamed, not in pain, in loss of control. Civilizations accustomed to shaping reality suddenly found their reach curtailed. They could still survive, still exist, but no longer dominate unchecked. The irreversible decision had been made long ago. Humanity had chosen to value the galaxy over its freedom, and now that choice was being enforced. The elders of the great civilizations had faced extinction events before. Supernova chains, dimensional instabilities, invasions by species that burned themselves out in conquest. Those threats had screamed their intentions into the void. This one did not. Humanity's presence, if it could still be called that, was defined by calm, by measured action taken only when thresholds were crossed. The Guardians did not posture. They did not threaten. They simply were, immense and patient, enforcing boundaries with a precision that made resistance feel childish. Alien commanders began to understand that panic itself was dangerous. Human systems reacted to acceleration, to escalation, to loss of restraint. Fear became a trigger. Military councils found themselves paralyzed, their members arguing not over how to win, but over how to avoid drawing attention. Fleets held position for fear that movement itself might be interpreted as aggression. The galaxy had never been this quiet. That silence was worse than war. From the perspective of lesser species, the Guardians were no longer abstract constructs. They were inevitabilities. Massive shapes moving through deep space with no urgency and no resistance. Their trajectories calculated centuries in advance. They did not rush to stop threats. They arrived where threats would eventually be. This terrified the analysts most of all. Human constructs were not reacting to present behavior. They were correcting futures. Fear deepened when alien observers realized how little of humanity's capability had actually been revealed. The Guardian constructs deployed so far were not numerous. They were not everywhere. They represented only a fraction of the mass energy shifts detected in deep space. Vast regions still held signatures of dormant infrastructure, anchors, frameworks, and shadowed constructs that had never activated. Humanity had not committed fully. They had barely begun. A radical faction emerged among the elder powers. They called the Guardians an abomination. They argued that allowing an extinct civilization to dictate the galaxy's future was surrender by another name. That freedom required risk. That extinction was preferable to eternal restraint. Their fear curdled into defiance. They began planning something the galaxy had not seen in millions of years. A total strike. Not against a Guardian. Against the system humanity was protecting. The logic was simple and horrifying. If the Guardians were designed to prevent catastrophic cascades, then triggering one deliberately might force them to reveal their limits or destroy themselves trying to stop it. The plan involved destabilizing a densely populated stellar nexus, not annihilating it outright, but pushing it just past the threshold of controllable collapse. A test. If the Guardians intervened, they could be studied, countered, perhaps overwhelmed. If they failed, the galaxy would burn. The fact that this plan was seriously debated told humanity everything it needed to know. Admiral Renthcole stood before the Elder Council chamber. The debate had raged for 6 hours. Supreme Chancellor Vikros addressed the assembled leaders. We face a choice. Submit to the will of a dead species, or prove we still control our own fate. By murdering trillions, someone shouted. By testing limits, Vikros corrected. If the Guardians can be overwhelmed, we can negotiate. If they cannot, he paused. Then we deserve to know our cage. This is madness. This is necessity. Vikros activated a display showing the stellar nexus. We destabilize this system. Carefully. Controlled collapse that the Guardians must respond to. When they reveal their full capability, we'll finally understand what we're dealing with. And if they fail, silence. Then we'll have our answer a different way, Vikros said quietly. The vote was called. It passed by 3 votes. Vikros initiated the sequence, knowing he'd just condemned either the Guardians or the galaxy itself. There was no third option anymore. Human constructs began repositioning, not toward the radicals, toward the Nexus. Observers watched as multiple Guardian-class masses shifted in coordinated silence, their movements slow but unstoppable, bending space in ways that made precise tracking impossible. They did not accelerate. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Alien fear reached a breaking point when a Guardian construct executed a maneuver that had not been theorized as possible. It split. Not physically, functionally. A single planet-sized mass unfolded into multiple interlinked segments, each maintaining full operational capability. Redundancy layered upon redundancy. The construct did not weaken. It became more resilient. The message was unmistakable. Humanity had planned for failure at every level, including the failure of its own Guardians. There was no single point of victory, no decapitation strike, no heroic last stand to be exploited. The galaxy was staring at a system designed to endure total war without ever engaging in it directly. As countdowns began, analysts detected something new. Human infrastructure across the galaxy was waking up, not activating, acknowledging. Dormant systems synchronized, hidden anchors aligned, mass energy reserves unlocked from containment fields that had held for centuries. Humanity had been holding back. Now, for the first time, the galaxy sensed what it felt like when that restraint was about to end. The galaxy did not erupt into chaos. It went quiet. Across millions of systems, communications traffic slowed, then thinned, then fell into disciplined silence. Fleets held position. Weapons powered but did not fire. Even the most volatile civilizations seemed to sense that noise itself had become dangerous. This was no longer a war. It was a reckoning. The stellar nexus trembled. At its heart, the star systems destabilized exactly as the radicals had planned. Carefully, precisely, nudged just far enough that collapse was no longer theoretical. Gravity wells warped. Fusion rates spiked. Interlinked stars began feeding instability into one another like falling dominoes. It was a disaster engineered to be unstoppable, and now it was visible to everyone. Trillions of lives existed within the nexus. Entire cultures. Histories older than humanity's own written record. Evacuation was impossible. There was no time. No corridor wide enough to carry that many souls away. The Guardians arrived. Not all at once. Not dramatically. They were already there. Mara Telkin was still on Carvel when it happened. The system she'd watched nearly die months ago was dying again. But this time deliberately. The radicals had targeted the nearby nexus, thousands of systems linked by gravitational harmony. If one fell, they all would. Her sensors detected the Guardians before she could see them. Mass distortions appearing throughout the sector. Not one Guardian. Dozens. Then she saw them emerge. Structures unfolding from nothing. Planet-sized constructs shedding their camouflage and moving with impossible coordination. They didn't rush. Didn't panic. They moved like a calculation resolving. The Guardians formed a lattice around the destabilizing stars. Mara watched in awe as they began, working. Gravity redirected. Energy flows channeled. Entire stars guided into synchronized behavior. It looked like surgery on reality itself. Her console showed the cost. Guardians were failing. One collapsed entirely, converting itself into a containment field. Another fractured, its pieces still holding position even as they drifted apart. They were dying to save the Nexus. Dying to save people who'd tried to destroy them. Mara found tears on her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why save us?" The Guardians didn't answer. They never did. They just continued their work. Because duty didn't require gratitude. Hidden constructs shed their cloaks. Anchors long embedded within the fabric of space revealed themselves as colossal frameworks unfolding from nothingness. Planet-sized masses adjusted position with glacial precision, forming a lattice around the destabilizing stars. They did not rush. They did not hesitate. They moved like something that had rehearsed this moment for centuries. Human constructs did not attempt to destroy the radicals responsible. Their fleets were irrelevant now. This was beyond punishment, beyond vengeance. Humanity's doctrine had never been about enemies. It was about thresholds. The Nexus crossed one. Within the Guardian lattice, energy flows redirected. Gravity was reshaped, bent into controlled paths that defied known physics. Entire stars were partially enclosed, not caged, but guided, forced into synchronized behavior against their natural tendencies. The effort was staggering. Sensors recorded power draws that eclipsed the output of entire galaxies. Human systems burned through reserves accumulated across centuries in minutes. Constructs began shedding mass, converting structure into energy, sacrificing themselves piece by piece to hold the line. No human voice spoke. No declaration was made. But across the alien networks, a truth spread with crushing clarity. Humanity was not acting to win. They were acting because someone had to. The radicals realized too late what they had done. Their plan had succeeded only in proving the Guardians' necessity. They attempted to abort, to stabilize the Nexus themselves, but their systems were locked out, denied access by human protocols embedded so deeply into shared physical constants that resistance was meaningless. They screamed for mercy. Humanity did not answer. Not because it was cruel, because mercy was not the objective. Stability was. As the Nexus fought itself, Guardian constructs began failing. One collapsed entirely, its mass folding inward and vanishing as it converted itself into a containment field that sealed a runaway star. Another fractured under the strain, its segments drifting apart while still maintaining function, still holding their assigned vectors. Alien fleets moved instinctively, rushing toward the Nexus, desperate to help, to do something. They were stopped, not by force, by understanding. Every intervention risked destabilizing the lattice. Every unplanned energy input could cascade into total collapse. The galaxy's greatest armadas were reduced to spectators, watching salvation unfold beyond their ability to contribute. That helplessness cut deeper than fear. For the first time, the dominant civilizations were irrelevant. Senna watched from her observation post as human reserves activated. Deep space habitats, ones that hadn't appeared on any map, suddenly blazed with energy. These weren't military installations. They were homes. Families had lived there. Generations of humans, hidden, waiting for this moment. Now they were feeding their entire existence into the Guardian network. One by one, the habitats burned out. Their populations, tens of millions, Senna realized with horror, ceased to exist in moments. No distress calls. No evacuation attempts. Just acceptance. They knew, Senna whispered. They all knew this was what they were for. Her assistant stared at the display. How could they live like that, knowing they were just fuel? Senna pulled up recovered human records. Found a fragment from one of the habitats. A personal log, dated decades ago. My daughter asked me today if we'll ever see the galaxy. I told her we do see it. Every day, we watch over it. That's our purpose. She asked if anyone will remember us. I said no. And she smiled. Said that's good. Because if no one remembers us, it means we did our job right. Senna closed the file. She understood now. Humanity hadn't built Guardians. They'd become them. Hidden reserves were unleashed, systems humanity had never intended to use unless there was no alternative. Entire deep space habitats, long believed abandoned, activated their cores and fed power into the lattice. These habitats were not defended. They burned out. Millions of unseen human descendants, communities that had lived and died in obscurity, were erased in moments, their sole purpose fulfilled without recognition. Alien historians recorded the loss in stunned silence. Humanity had built lives knowing they would be spent like fuel, not for glory, not for remembrance, but because duty demanded it. As the Nexus teetered, the Guardians executed their final maneuver. They began to synchronize themselves, not coordinate, unify. Massive constructs aligned along vectors that spanned light years, locking into a single distributed system. Each Guardian ceased acting as an individual unit and became a node in something far larger. A galaxy-scale machine. The strain was unbearable. Human infrastructure groaned under forces no design had ever fully tested. Safeguards tripped and were overridden. Redundancies failed and were replaced by sacrifice. Entire Guardian segments detached and fell into stars to absorb excess energy, vanishing without trace. The lattice held. Barely. Alien observers realized what the next phase would require. The Guardians could stabilize the Nexus temporarily, but permanent correction demanded something else. Massachusetts, more than the constructs possessed, more than the galaxy could spare. The implication spread, horrifying and inevitable. To save the Nexus, something else would have to be given up. Humanity had anticipated this. Buried within the deepest layers of recovered doctrine was a concept alien strategists had struggled to understand. Human duty was not to themselves. It was to the future. A final protocol unlocked. Across the Guardian network, a signal propagated, silent, absolute, irreversible. Systems that had never activated before began responding. Not constructs. Foundations. Deep within the galaxy's structure, ancient human-built anchors engaged, altering gravitational balances on a scale no one had believed possible. Entire regions of space began to shift, slow, and reconfigure. The galaxy itself was being asked to change shape. The cost would be catastrophic. Star systems would be displaced. Trade routes destroyed. Civilizations isolated permanently. Some worlds would be lost, not destroyed, but cut off, drifting into darkness without hope of return. Humanity had known this outcome. They had accepted it. The Guardians did not ask permission. They did not seek consensus. They acted. As the final alignment began, the Nexus trembled one last time, hovering on the edge between salvation and annihilation. Guardian constructs flared with energy, their silhouettes blinding across the void. Alien civilizations held their breath, not because they expected victory, but because they finally understood what humanity truly was. Not conquerors, not rulers, but the ones willing to choose loss over extinction. The final forces locked into place. The lattice reached critical stability, and in the near silence before the universe decided whether it would hold or break, everything stopped. The universe did not end. That was the first realization. The second came more slowly, settling across the galaxy like the aftermath of a storm too vast to comprehend all at once. The stellar nexus stabilized. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it held. Fusion cascades dampened into controlled rhythms. Gravitational tides flattened into new, permanent shapes. The stars did not return to what they had been. They became something else, something stable. Across the Guardian lattice, lights dimmed, one by one, then in waves. Entire constructs went dark, their mass exhausted, their purpose fulfilled. Some remained, drifting silently in their final positions. Others collapsed inward, converting their last substance into containment fields that would last longer than any civilization now watching them. The galaxy lived, but it was not the same galaxy. Whole regions of space had shifted. Distances once trivial became insurmountable. Trade empires fractured overnight. Political power maps, so carefully balanced for millennia, were rendered meaningless by new stellar geometries. Some civilizations found themselves isolated forever. Others were forced into proximity with former enemies. A few were simply gone, not destroyed, lost, drifting beyond the reach of known space, preserved but unreachable, their future rewritten without consent. The cost was undeniable, and yet, trillions still lived who would not have. That truth echoed through every surviving civilization. The Guardians did not celebrate. They did not regroup. They began to shut down. Alien observers waited for instructions, for proclamations, for demands of obedience or tribute. None came. Instead, the remaining human systems initiated a final sequence, one that had been encoded before humanity disappeared, long before the galaxy knew it needed saving. They began to explain, not with speeches, not with justification, with records. Across the surviving networks, data unlocked itself. Human history, once fragmented and erased, unfolded in full, not as propaganda, but as confession. The early fears, the predictive models, the arguments humanity had torn itself apart over before choosing this path. They showed their failures, their wars, their genocides, their near extinctions. They showed the moment they realized that power without restraint would eventually destroy everything it touched. They showed the choice, not unanimous, not peaceful, a decision forced by mathematics and morality intersecting at the same terrible conclusion. Someone would eventually break the galaxy, and if no one stopped it, everything would burn. So humanity decided that if a guardian was needed, it would be them, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the ones who knew how easy it was to fail. The records revealed why humans never returned, why they never warned the galaxy, why they never asked for help. They did not trust themselves to rule without becoming what they feared. So they built something that would outlive them and bound it with rules they could never change. Human systems were forbidden from conquest, forbidden from rule, forbidden from expansion beyond containment necessity. They could only act to prevent irreversible collapse. Nothing more, nothing less. Alien reactions fractured along predictable lines. Some raged, some wept, some fell silent in reverence. Religious orders declared humanity divine. Others declared them monsters. Political leaders struggled to explain to their people how an extinct species had reshaped reality without asking permission. But beneath every reaction lay the same understanding. Humanity had saved them, not because they were worthy, but because someone had to. The remaining guardians executed their final directive. They withdrew, not vanishing, but retreating into positions where they would never interfere again unless the same thresholds were crossed. Their presence became background, immovable, patient, watchful, a constant reminder. Civilizations adapted. Slowly, painfully. New alliances formed out of necessity rather than ambition. Wars became rarer, not because species became kinder, but because escalation now carried consequences that no one could escape. Human restraint had reshaped galactic behavior. Historians would later argue over whether this was salvation or stagnation. But no one could argue with survival. 1 year after the Nexus stabilized, Mara Telkin stood in a memorial plaza on Carvel. Around her, similar monuments were being built across 1,000 worlds. This one was simple. A black stone column. No names. There were too many, and most had never been recorded. Just a number. 247 billion. Human lives spent to save the galaxy. Beneath it, the only words humanity had ever asked the galaxy to remember. Duty requires no witness. Mara placed her hand on the stone. It was warm, as if the energy of all those lives still resonated within it. "Thank you," she whispered. The Guardians, still visible at the edge of the system, did not respond. They never would. But Mara stayed there for an hour anyway, keeping vigil for people who'd never asked for it. Someone had to remember, even if remembering meant acknowledging how badly the galaxy had failed to see what humanity truly was. Not conquerors, not saviors, just the ones willing to pay the price no one else would. The final human transmission activated last. It was not addressed to governments, not to councils. It was addressed to the future. It explained nothing new. It asked for nothing. It simply stated a truth humanity had learned too late to save itself, but not too late to save others. Power is easy. Responsibility is not. The transmission ended. The signal faded. Humanity, what remained of it, returned to silence. Not as rulers, not as gods, but as something far rarer. Guardians who never wanted to exist. Cenavath's archive became the most visited historical site in Imperial space. People came not to see humanity's victories, but their losses, the worlds they'd abandoned, the lives they'd given up. The personal log from New Tasman was preserved behind protective glass. Visitors would stand before it for hours, reading the words of someone who'd volunteered to die so their child could live. The archive's final exhibit was a simple display, a star chart showing former human space. Overlaid were the protection corridors they'd created. the civilizations they'd saved, the species that existed because humanity had chosen restraint over revenge. At the bottom, a single plaque: they did not conquer the galaxy. They made sure the galaxy survived. Admiral Renthcole lived for another 47 years. He never commanded a fleet again. Instead, he became a teacher at the Strategic Academy, where he taught a single course: ethics of power. His first lecture was always the same. He would stand before the new cadets and ask them one question: if you had the power to destroy everything, but chose not to, are you weak? The students always debated. Some said yes. Some said no. Some were uncertain. Renth never gave them the answer. Instead, he would show them the human records, the evacuations, the sacrifices, the choice made across centuries. Humanity could have burned the galaxy, he would say at the end. They chose to save it instead, not because they were weak, but because they understood something we forgot. What's that, sir? Someone would always ask. That the strongest thing you can do is survive. The second strongest is making sure others can too. And as the galaxy continued on its altered path, every civilization carried the same unspoken knowledge into the future. That when the universe stood on the edge of annihilation, humanity did not ask who deserved to be saved. They only asked what must be done, and they paid the price so no one else had to.